Okay guys, this video is going to be different than the videos I've done previously. I had this whole conversation with ChatGPT and I thought it was interesting and I thought I'd bring it to you. With everything that we have going on right now with our government, with our politics, I wanted to see what did Meta think? What did AI think? Maybe I was looking at this all wrong, and this was an opportunity for me to ask it directly. And I hope it gives you the same. I hope it gives you some insight, because it definitely gave me some insight. I will try to do each recording in 20-minute intervals. No more than 22 based upon where I am, so that nobody's overwhelmed and it's not too much. But I hope you like the series, and please do get into those comments, and maybe there's more questions we should be asking. Let me know what you want me to ask on this trail, and we can see what we get down to, and what AI says. But without further ado, let's get started. Okay guys, before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. You'll see here is where I ask the question, and this will be ChatGPT's response. Here you'll see this little oval, and that will basically tell you where it's getting its information and how it's come up. Its sources, basically, how it's come up with that determination. So here it's got 5 sources: Wikipedia, NPR, Axios, and YouTube, and the Economic Times. I did not provide these sources. This is what ChatGPT found. So let's get started. So I start with Donald Trump signed an executive order rolling back the segregation ban. What does it mean for America? ChatGPT says, President Donald Trump's recent executive order has rescinded long-standing prohibitions against segregated facilities in federal contracts, effectively removing explicit bans on practices such as separate waiting rooms, restaurants, and drinking fountains for federal contractors. Implications for America. Civil rights concern. This action has raised alarms among civil rights advocates who argue that eliminating explicit prohibitions against segregation in federal contracts could signal a regression in the nation's commitment to equality and non-discrimination. Legal and social ramifications. While existing laws such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 continue to prohibit segregation and discrimination, the removal of explicit contractual language may lead to ambiguities in enforcement, potentially emboldening discriminatory practices among federal contractors. Impact on diversity initiatives. This executive order aligns with broader efforts by the administration to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI programs within federal agencies and among contractors. Such actions could undermine decades of progress toward creating inclusive workplaces and addressing systemic discrimination. Public backlash and activism. The policy shift has sparked public outcry and is likely to invigorate grassroots activism reminiscent of the civil rights movement, as communities and organizations mobilize to protect and advance equality and non-discrimination principles. In summary, the revocation of the segregation ban in federal contracts represents a significant policy shift with profound implications for civil rights, legal enforcement, workplace diversity, and social activism in America. My question was, what actions has the current administration taken that tells if it will in fact support the Civil Rights Act of 1964? ChatGPT says, the current administration under President Donald Trump has undertaken several actions that raise concerns about its commitment to uphold the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The first of which is the rescission of the Prohibition of Segregated Facilities Clause. The administration removed a long-standing clause for federal contracting rules that explicitly banned segregated facilities. This clause had been in place since the 1960s to prevent contractors from maintaining segregated work areas, restrooms, dining facilities, and other amenities based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin. While existing civil rights laws still prohibit such segregation, the removal of this explicit ban has raised concerns among civil rights advocates about potential ambiguities in enforcement. 2. Termination of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. An executive order was signed to end DEI initiatives within federal agencies and among contractors. This order aims to restore merit-based opportunity by eliminating programs perceived as promoting radical DEI preferencing. Critics argue that this move undermines efforts to address systemic discrimination and promote a more equitable society. 3. Redefinition of anti-discrimination protections. The administration has reinterpreted civil rights laws, focusing on combating what it describes as anti-white racism. This shift includes efforts to dismantle affirmative action policies and other measures designed to address historical injustices against marginalized communities. Such actions are viewed by some as a reversal of progress made since the Civil Rights Movement. And 4, dismantling the U.S. Department of Education. The administration unilaterally dismantled the U.S. Department of Education, reallocating its functions directly under federal control with an ideological agenda. This move threatens civil rights protections and key educational functions, potentially compromising the enforcement of anti-discrimination laws in educational settings. Collectively, these actions suggest a departure from the principles enshrined in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, raising concerns about the administration's commitment to protecting civil rights and promoting equality. I follow up with what next steps does the administration need to make that will ensure civil rights are no longer a thing? And y'all forgive me for the wording of the questions. They were just coming at me so quickly. And I knew ChatGPT would know what I meant. So ChatGPT says, if an administration, so this is not directly saying the current administration, it's saying if an administration aimed to eliminate civil rights protections, it would need to take several drastic and likely unconstitutional steps. Here's what that might look like. Repeal or weaken the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The administration would need Congress to amend or repeal key provisions of the Civil Rights Act, which protects against discrimination in employment, education, and public accommodations. This would be extremely difficult given public opposition and legal challenges. The administration would need to stack the courts with like-minded judges. Appointing federal and Supreme Court justices who oppose civil rights protections could lead to rulings that weaken or reinterpret existing laws. Overturning landmark cases like Brown v. Board of Education or Loving v. Virginia would be major steps toward dismantling civil rights. Step 3, roll back federal oversight. The administration could defund or dissolve civil rights enforcement agencies such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Without these agencies, discrimination cases would be harder to pursue. Step 4, promote state and local control over rights. Encouraging states to set their own policies on discrimination and segregation could lead to varying protections across the country, making civil rights weaker in some areas. This would mirror the pre-civil rights era when states enforced segregation. Step 5. Restrict voting rights. Rolling back the Voting Rights Act protection would limit participation in elections, particularly among marginalized communities. Voter ID laws, purging voter rolls, and closing polling places in minority areas could make it harder for certain groups to have political power. Eliminate DEI and affirmative action. Banning diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and affirmative action in education and workplaces could make it harder to address systemic inequality. This could lead to greater disparities in hiring, college admissions, and career advancement. Normalize discriminatory policies. If discrimination becomes legally acceptable in businesses, schools, and public places, it could create a culture where segregation and bias become the norm again. This could extend to LGBTQ plus rights, religious freedoms, and immigrant protections. Would this be legal or sustainable? Many of these actions would violate constitutional protections under the 14th and 15th Amendments, leading to massive legal challenges. Public resistance would be significant, with protests, activism, and possibly international condemnation. Bottom line, while an administration could attempt to undermine civil rights, doing so completely would require overcoming major legal, political, and social barriers. Civil rights protections are deeply ingrained in American law and history, making them difficult to erase entirely. So my follow-up question was, what steps have the current administration taken towards this end? So what steps has the current administration taken to end civil rights? ChatGPT says, the current administration has taken several actions that significantly undermine civil rights protections. Number 1, the rescission of anti-discrimination protections in federal contracts. This administration, or the administration, repealed the Fair Pay and Safe Workplace executive order, which was designed to ensure that federal contractors comply with labor and civil rights laws, thereby removing explicit prohibitions against discriminatory practices. They have defunded legal aid for unaccompanied migrant children. Funding cuts to programs providing legal representation to unaccompanied immigrant children have left many to navigate complex immigration proceedings alone, increasing their vulnerability and undermining their legal rights. 3, targeting activists based on political views. The detention of individuals like Mahmoud Khalil, a legal permanent resident and activist under the administration's Catch and Revoke program, raises concerns about free speech and due process rights, particularly when actions appear motivated by individuals' political beliefs. Issuance of executive orders threatening human rights. On the first day in office, the administration issued numerous executive orders that threatened to undermine respect for international human rights, both domestically and abroad. Halting civil rights enforcement for workers. The administration directed federal agencies to cease processing discrimination complaints based on sexual orientation and gender identity, effectively stripping protections from LGBTQ plus workers and signaling a broader rollback of civil rights enforcement. Collectively, these actions represent a concerted effort to dismantle existing civil rights protections, posing significant challenges to the principles of equality and justice. So I asked, how close is the current administration to dismantling civil rights? And it repeated a lot. It said the current administration has implemented several measures that significantly weaken civil rights protections. 1, dismantling the Department of Education. An executive order has been issued to begin dismantling the Department of Education. jeopardizing the enforcement of civil rights protections in educational settings. It has halted funding for legal aid to unaccompanied migrant children, which we spoke about, and detention for activists based on political views, which we spoke about earlier. So I'm not going to reread it here. But it does say collectively these actions represent a concerted effort to dismantle existing civil rights protections, posing significant challenges to the principles of equality and justice. So I asked, how many years before civil rights is gone based on the actions of the current administration? ChatGPT says, predicting an exact timeline for the complete dismantling of civil rights protections is difficult, as it depends on several factors, including legal challenges, public resistance, and future political shifts. However, if the current administration continues its trajectory of rolling back civil rights protections, a significant erosion could occur within a decade or sooner. I'm just going to read that again. However, if the current administration continues its trajectory of rolling back civil rights protections, a significant erosion could occur within a decade or sooner. Factors influencing the timeline. Legal challenges and court decisions. Many of the administration's actions will face lawsuits. If courts, especially the Supreme Court, uphold rollbacks, civil rights protections could weaken rapidly. If conservative judges dominate the courts, reversal of past civil rights rulings could accelerate. Legislative and policy changes, 3 to 7 years. If Congress enacts new laws reducing civil rights protections, these could take effect within a few years. Repealing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or similar laws would require control of both houses of Congress, which could happen within 2 to 4 election cycles. Public resistance and activism. Strong public opposition could slow or even reverse efforts to dismantle civil rights. If resistance is weak or voter suppression measures succeed, rollbacks could happen more quickly. And 4, cultural and institutional shifts could take 5 to 10 years. If discrimination becomes normalized in workplaces, education, and public policy, civil rights protections could be eroded informally, even if laws remain. A generational shift in political leadership could either accelerate or reverse these trends. Best case versus worst case scenarios. Best case scenario. Legal battles, public activism, and political changes stop or reverse civil rights rollbacks within the next few years. Worst case scenario. Within 5 to 10 years, civil rights protections could be severely weakened, leading to legal segregation, discrimination, and loss of voting rights for marginalized groups. The next few election cycles and Supreme Court rulings will be critical in determining how far this rollback goes. So I said, well, this current administration is not listening to the courts. Adjust your timeline accordingly. So ChatGPT says, if the current administration is actively ignoring court rulings and continuing its efforts to dismantle civil rights protections, the timeline for significant erosion accelerates dramatically. Without judicial oversight acting as a safeguard, civil rights could be largely undone within 3 to 7 years, with some protections disappearing even sooner. Revised timeline for civil rights erosion. 1 to 2 years. Rapid policy implementation. Executive orders and federal agency directives will continue to strip civil rights protections in education, employment, and public accommodations. Federal enforcement agencies, EEOC, DOJ, Civil Rights Division, could be defunded or restructured to prevent action against discrimination. State and local governments may follow suit, passing laws that allow segregation or other forms of discrimination. 3 to 5 years, institutional and legal collapse. Without court enforcement, states and businesses may feel emboldened to ignore federal civil rights laws, effectively creating legal segregation and discrimination. The administration could target voting rights more aggressively, suppressing opposition by restricting ballot access, particularly in marginalized communities. Federal funding could be used as leverage to push states and institutions toward compliance with anti-civil rights policies. 5 to 7 years. Full dismantling of civil rights protections. If opposition remains weak, laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 could be repealed or rendered meaningless through lack of enforcement. Schools, workplaces, and public spaces could legally reintroduce segregation and discrimination policies. Social norms could shift, making discrimination more acceptable, especially if propaganda and state-controlled narratives frame civil rights as anti-American or anti-traditional values. Critical factors that could alter the timeline. Public resistance. If large-scale protests, strikes, or civil disobedience movements emerge, they could slow or reverse these efforts. State and local government. Some states may resist federal rollbacks, creating a divide where civil rights protections vary by region. International pressure. Global condemnation and economic consequences, such as sanctions, loss of trade partnerships, could force the administration to reconsider. Military and law enforcement. If the administration relies on force to suppress opposition, civil unrest, or even a constitutional crisis could occur, impacting the timeline. Bottom line, if unchecked, civil rights in America could be functionally dismantled within 3 to 7 years, with some protections disappearing even sooner. The 2028 election cycle will likely be a decisive moment in determining whether these changes become permanent or are reversed. Wow. Okay, guys, I'm going to end this video here because it's already been 21 minutes with this section. Please be sure to get into those comments and let me know your thoughts. Of course, as always, please do like, comment, and share. I want to know what you're thinking about this. Let me know if you have some additional questions that I should be asking ChatGPT. Let's open this up. Let's make this a group think and see what can we get to the bottom of this. But make sure you follow this series and click on the next one. We'll see you there. And until next time, toodles.